a few years ago, I just decided to stop the nonsense. And I was like, if we don't get reading right, nothing else matters. So I started focusing on that. So real quickly, so with FULCRUM and the NAACP, we've made reading a priority. We did a root cause analysis. We found out that literacy really was the root of a lot of these concerns that we have in education. Kids dropping out. You know, in San Francisco right now, overall, about half the kids are reading proficient. This is back in 2019, SBAC test. And, you know, a little better than Oakland, not as good as San Jose, but really half the kids, right? We're talking about half the kids. This is just everybody. Third grade reading, I should say. It's third grade reading. Half. And I don't think there's anybody that would say that's good. I mean, maybe you could say that's better than maybe it was a couple of years ago or something like that, but I would hope that we all want more for our students and our community, right? We know we have brilliant teachers. We know we have diligent principals. But that result is what it is. But then oftentimes this conversation kicks in about achievement gaps. You know, the Black kids and the white kids, and the Latino kids and the Asian kids, and who's better and who's worse with reading and all this. But I look at it differently, and I want to put something to you tonight for your consideration, which is, if you look at Black folks with money in SFUSD, okay, that non-free and reduced lunch folks, okay, it's about the same as the whole group. That's all students, no disabilities. But when you look at African Americans who qualify for free and reduced lunch, the results are strikingly similar to those who have disabilities. Now that's just interesting. Now, correlation doesn't imply causality, but common sense says something's in the milk, something's going on here that may go beyond race. That's a factor, but it may go beyond that. I want to put something to you. I'm sure you've heard of Kumon, right? That's the tutoring company. They have little centers all over town, literally all over town. And so if you have money, if you have access to resources, you use things like Kumon. And from their website, this is what they say they do. This is what they say. They promote, mastery of foundational skills and diverse needs and abilities. That's code for dyslexia. That's what that means, right? Those who have kids with dyslexia, when you see that, you say, okay, they're talking to me. Nurtures core skills, masteries of basic reading and math. That's what they're selling. And business is booming for them. So I want to propose a scenario to you. And I'm going to ask you to put on your thinking cap and ask you, what would you do in this scenario? And I want you to imagine that you are hosting exchange students or international students or what have you. You're the host or hostess. And you got 10 kids coming to stay with you for 13 months. That's akin to, K-12, 13 years. They're coming to stay with you for 13 months. Now, one of the kids has their own money. You ain't got to worry about that kid. They're going to, 3 of the kids, they're going to eat whatever you cook. There's no one diet in particular that they're going to eat it. Then you have 4, they got to have broccoli. And they need it regularly for the first 4 months that they stay with you. After that, they're all right. They can go ahead on and do whatever. But the first 4 months, they got to have that broccoli like clockwork. And then you got a couple of kids where medically, they can only eat broccoli for at least the first 4 months and maybe longer. They get their blood tested, vitamin K. They process or they digest food differently from others. There's nothing wrong. I mean, they're just normal kids. They just process the food differently. So they gotta have that broccoli. My question to you is, when you go grocery shopping, what would you do? Whose health would you pay the most attention to? Who would you center your grocery shopping around? The main menu item. And what about your money? How would you handle things if you only had a certain amount of money? And here's one. How might your own palate, your own taste in food impact your decision on what you bought and what you made? Let me add another layer on this. Those 3 kids that will usually eat whatever you cook, those kids, they're the chefs. They're now the food critics. They own the restaurants. They're the food tasters. Because some of those kids, if they don't get what they need, it's going to be bad medically. They might get sent to the hospital from malnourishment and not getting what they need. And the hospital might send them back and say, there's nothing wrong with these kids. They just need to eat broccoli daily and on schedule. Now, and I can hear the restaurant saying, well, look, you just can't eat broccoli. Okay, that's boring. You need to learn, these kids need to learn to appreciate fine dining. And they need a balanced diet. And I love this last one here. Our recipes come from the south of France. All kids deserve great food. This is equity. And that's really what they might believe. And somebody in the hospital will say, yeah, man, but they're ending up in the hospital. So the fine dining is great, but they're in the hospital. Well, then you give them a special menu or they'll eat the broccoli when they're ready, somebody might say. Or there's so much trauma, they lost their appetite. Reading is the same thing. You got about 5% of kids, they're going to learn to read no matter what. It doesn't really matter what we do. They're going to be all right. 5%. This is what the research says. Nancy Young synthesized this research into this chart that I like to use a lot. And then you got about, another third, whatever. Teach them however you want to teach them. They're going to learn it. There's no one way. These are those folks who the chefs, the people, those are your teachers and your principals and your superintendent and your this and your that and your coaches. And that's our frame, is because we learned it however we learned it. But then you have these folks here. They got to have it. They got to have it in those foundational years. They got to have it. And then the dyslexia folks, brilliant children like all the rest, but they process it differently. And so there's going to need to be some more things. And these two groups here need a structured approach. Now, you could call it whatever you want to. Now, I'm going to get into politics, but they have to have things laid out step by step. That's all. Just lay it all out step by step and teach them how to read. That's what they need. Don't skip around. Don't skip steps. This is with the broccoli in education and learning how to read. Kids got to have these. The majority of our kids got to have this. Now, there's other things too, writing, oral language development, and some other things, but you got to have these. And there's no war, there's no disagreement. We all understand. Some may think that there's different amounts of different pillars, fine. But they know that we need these things. But those kids got to have it systematically, explicitly, and directly. You know, who says this? Well, the American Federation of Teachers has been saying this for over 20 years. You go on their website, look up effective reading programs and see what you see. They've been leading the charge. We've been so far in our feelings about unions and this and that people have ignored what they have been saying. And John Hattie, 300 million students and research, over 80,000 studies. So the research says this too. And then there's these two pieces, the national reading panels. The federal government said the same thing. And then there's this one I'm gonna focus on tonight. The Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. In my example, you would say, well, just ask the hospital. The hospital will tell you what's going on. The kids keep coming to the hospital. Do you know they'll find out what's wrong? Well, guess what? You can just tell it. You ask the prisons. They'll tell you what's going on. They know. These kids are coming in there. They say the link between academic failure and delinquency is welded to reading failure. Welded. And they are suggesting, the prisons are telling us, hey, maybe y'all might want to, give them what the research says they need. This is 20-some years ago. This is not new. And what does the research say? Give them the broccoli. Give them these things. Give it to them directly, systematically, and explicitly. It just so happens that what the kids with dyslexia need, your Black kids need too. Your kids without money who can't afford Kumon. Your kids who are learning a second language. Your kids who are white. All kids, they need this. And some can learn it however they want to, find it, whatever method. But most kids need this. They also said it's not just a relationship between these things, it's a cause. They said they can't read, they can't decipher, they can't decode accurately. And they said most of the kids that end up in jail, there's nothing abnormal. These regular kids. And the ones who do have dyslexia, the ones, look at number 4, the handicapped readers, they're just not getting the type of teaching recommended by the research. So in Oakland, we decided to make some demands. The community came together, powerful coalition of nonprofits, parents, civil rights organizations, et cetera, universities. And we came to the district leadership and said, hey, look, we need some changes here. Our kids are floundering and we need your help. And we're demanding this. And I say this is important as a frame of reference because the dyslexic community, I call them, the special needs community and the African-American community, let me just be real with you for a minute. You know, challenge makes strange bedfellows. We need each other. We need your privilege. You need our moral indignation. Illiteracy has been denied Black folks for generations after generations, ever since 1831, Nat Turner's rebellion. And now, as I showed you earlier in that slide about people with no money, Black folks with no money and folks with disability, now you're in the same boat we in. Now you know how it feels to have your child set upon, to send your child to school, and you wonder, is anybody paying attention to my child? Knowing that if you don't intervene, your child will not get what they need. And everybody's nice and everybody means well and everybody is loving and smiles and everybody has good intentions, but they don't know how to help your child. That feeling of helplessness, and you see the light get a little dimmer and a little dimmer, and the frustration. Some of us, we can yell all day long and scream and jump and holler, but they will get ignored. But when you have federal law behind you, it's different. And then vice versa. Some of these so-called soccer moms, I like to call them, who are out there at the board meeting, they will dismiss you. They'll say, oh, these white women, what do they know? This is California, we're all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you a bunch of white women asking for this stuff. You know what? Be gone. But it's different when you come together. It's different when you say, my child and my situation reflects their child and their situation, because we need the same thing. We need reading to be taught step by step. Because if it's taught step by step, almost all kids can read. About 2% might still have some challenges learning to read, but most of them will be able to read. So we need the same thing. So to those detractors and those people say, oh, we're worried about this and worried about that, I just hearken to Frederick Douglass, power concedes nothing without a demand. You have to be willing to stand up and say, we demand that our school system structure its literacy program in a way that's designed to get the greatest number of children to read. We know that the dyslexic kids and the African-American kids are the canaries in the coal mine. If they're all right, everybody's going to be all right. Everybody's going to be all right. This is my little beautiful Black girl. And she just found out that she had dyslexia a little while ago. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Is that all right? Yeah. Before you found out, what were you thinking was going on?
I just thought I was a little slow and kind of stupid, and I got frustrated with myself. And then it was frustrating because people thought that I wasn't trying, which made me kind of like depressed. So the whole experience, like school just sucked. I hated it. Didn't want to go. It was miserable.
When you found out that that's what was going on, what was your reaction?
I was happy. I was kind of hoping the whole time that something would pop up, because then it made me, if something didn't pop up, I was scared that people, like, I'd just be like, oh, I'm just not trying hard enough. Because I mean, like, that's just me problem. When I saw something pop up, I'm like, oh, there's hope for me. Yay. I was excited.
You was excited?
Yeah.
I love you, baby.
Me too.
I'm proud of you. People talk about trauma. We're going to have social emotional learning and trauma. We traumatize our kids every day when they don't get what they need in school. And they don't know. They don't know. You can't read, your reading is low, everybody's going ahead of you and this and that, and got your hood on in the back of the class. Our kids are not crazy. That's the first thing I want y'all to take away from this tonight. Your babies are all right. They just need what they need, and they deserve that.